This is a video response to questions for the transgender community by That Guy T. He has 11 questions that I consider to be honest and respectful, and these questions are addressed to anyone with facts and opinions and not necessarily only transgender individuals. I'll put a link to the original video in the description below, and to be absolutely clear, I have rephrased some of the questions for brevity while attempting to not alter the substance of those questions. So I'm not trying to build a straw man, I'm simply trying to save a little time. Question 1. Can someone be both transgender and transsexual? What is the difference, if any, between the two? According to the American Psychological Association, the term transgender is an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does not conform to that typically associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth. Gender identity refers to a person's internal sense of gender, and gender expression refers to the way that a person communicates gender identity to others through behavior, clothing, hairstyles, voice, or body characteristics. And as the article points out, the ways that the transgender people are talked about in popular culture, academia, and science are constantly changing. According to Merriam-Webster Online, transsexual is an adjective that refers to a person who strongly identifies with the opposite sex and may seek to live as a member of this sex, especially by undergoing surgery and hormone therapy. The noun is transsexualism. In common usage, the term transsexual may also refer to someone who has already undergone sex reassignment surgery. In a psychology text published in 2013, the term transsexualism is already considered an obsolete term for gender identity disorder. And this same text defines gender identity disorder as a psychological dissatisfaction with biological gender, or a disturbance in the sense of identity as a male or female, where the primary goal is not sexual arousal, but rather to live the life of the opposite gender. So the term transgender includes both identity and behaviors that express that identity, whereas the term transsexual includes what is now referred to as gender identity disorder and may also refer to individuals who have undergone sex reassignment surgery. Question 2. How subjective is transgender identity, and are there any objective criteria? Gender identity is just as subjective as any other sense of personal identity and may take many years to fully develop. However, there are objective criteria for identifying gender identity disorder. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, there are 4 criteria that are used to diagnose gender identity disorder. A strong and persistent cross-gender identification, which is not merely a desire for any perceived cultural advantage of being the other sex. A persistent discomfort with his or her sex or sense of inappropriateness in the gender role of that sex. The disturbance is not concurrent with a physical intersex condition. That is, the person is not a hermaphrodite. And the disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Question 3. Can the No True Scotsman fallacy be applied to transgender lifestyle? The short answer is yes. Any group has its less than desirable members, and the LGBT community at large is no exception. And no individual can expect to be taken seriously by redefining a generally accepted term for the purpose of exclusion. Question 4. Are there obvious cases of government discrimination against transgender people in the Western world? According to the ACLU website, there is ongoing litigation in cases of government discrimination against transgender people, specifically for post-operative transsexuals who are unable to obtain government identification that reflects their current sex. Transgender people are also banned from military service. I have done very little research on this topic, but I would venture that there are similar cases throughout the Western world. Question 5. Should gender identity be considered with respect to confinement in a correctional facility? It is my opinion that gender identity is much less important than actual biological gender for the purpose of assigning criminals to correctional facilities. I think that such consideration would put an unnecessary burden on society. Question 6. Is it wrong to classify a hermaphrodite as a transgender person? Hermaphrodites are more properly classified as intersex individuals who are born with anatomical abnormalities. Question 7. When encountering a transgender person, is it appropriate to use the pronoun that reflects the gender that person seems to identify with? Remembering that the term transgender includes gender expression, it would seem to me a sign of respect to a transgender person to use a pronoun or title of address that agrees with the gender that that individual seems to be expressing. Question 8. Why is the LGBT community so tolerant of social justice warriors who claim to represent the entire community with their rhetoric? And will this toleration likely end? On one hand, the LGBT community expects tolerance and so should be tolerant itself. On the other hand, as Thunderfoot says, feminism poisons everything, and by extension, social justice warriors poison everything. And the community will, in my opinion, eventually tire of their rhetoric. Question 9. How many letters can be added to LGBT before it becomes ridiculous? In my opinion, LGBT, which encompasses both sexual orientation and sexual identity, is inclusive enough. Every culture has subcultures, and the LGBT culture is no exception. Question 10. What's your opinion on otherkins? To be honest, I had never heard this term before now, but apparently an otherkin is someone who believes themselves to be partially or entirely non-human. And my opinion is that this is an extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence. Question 11. What steps will likely lead to a society which is more accepting of the transgender community? In my opinion, there are two major steps. The first is education, and this includes the ability to distinguish between what is demonstrably true and what is merely asserted to be true. And the second is interaction, recognizing people for who they are and accepting that everyone has the right to be happy in their life.